My own daughter told me to go live in a dumpster so her husband's family could take over my house. They watched me leave with nothing but a small bag, confident they had won. They never imagined that I owned the very ground their entire world was built on, and that I was about to cause an earthquake. If you have ever had to fight for your own dignity, press like and subscribe and let me know in the comments how far my story has traveled. I sat at the head of the oak dining table that I had sanded and finished with my own 2 hands 40 years ago, but I felt like a stranger waiting for a handout. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the kind of silence that only exists between people who share a roof but no longer share a heart. Robert, my son-in-law's father, put his fork down with a clatter, the sharp sound of metal on porcelain ringing out like a judgment. "Theodore," he began, his voice dripping with the condescending tone of a man offering unsolicited wisdom. "I have to be honest, this chicken stew, it's a bit on the salty side. Linda's blood pressure isn't what it used to be, you know." Linda Kyle's mother nodded in agreement, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "That's right, we're used to a blander diet. It's much healthier." I clenched my fists under the table, my old knuckles turning white. I'd spent the entire afternoon making this meal using my late wife Diane's recipe for chicken stew. It used to be my daughter Brianna's favorite. Now she just stared down at her plate, her thick hair hiding her eyes, pushing a piece of chicken around with her fork. She said nothing to defend me. Her silence was a blade twisting in my gut, sharper than any insult from these invaders in my home. My son-in-law Kyle cleared his throat, not to support me, but to manage me. "Dad, just try to accommodate them a little," he said, his voice soft but laced with reprimand. "My parents are only here for a little while. We're all family now." Family. The word echoed in my head, a bitter mockery. They had arrived 2 weeks ago with 2 small suitcases, claiming they were just here to visit the kids after selling their condo. Now they had claimed my home as their own. Robert sat in the armchair Diane used to occupy. Linda had rearranged my entire kitchen to her liking. And I, in the house I built from the ground up, was being treated like unpaid help. I didn't answer them. I just stood up, collected Robert and Linda's plates, and said in a flat, emotionless voice, "Let me see if I can find you something else." Brianna looked up at me, then a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She had already chosen her side. After dinner, I was the one left to clean up. The sound of running water filled the silence of the kitchen as I washed each plate from the dinner set Diane and I had picked out for our 25th anniversary. My eyes drifted to the new scratches on the polished oak floor, a deep gouge where someone had dragged something heavy. Memories flooded back. I remembered the day we moved in, how Diane had leaned her head on my shoulder looking out at the backyard. "This is our fortress, Theo," she'd said. "A place where love will always be the law." Her words felt like a ghost in the room. So did the promise I made to her as she lay in her hospital bed, her breath growing shallow. "Don't you worry," I had whispered, holding her frail hand. "I'll always take care of Brianna. Our girl will have everything she needs." And I had kept that promise. I had used most of my life's savings to give her the lavish wedding she wanted with Kyle, this handsome white boy from the world of finance. I thought I was buying her happiness. But now, standing in my disheveled kitchen, listening to the loud laughter of strangers in my living room, I knew I was wrong. My daughter's happiness was being built on the foundation of my own dignity. A few days later, my vague sense of dread became a harsh reality. A large moving truck pulled up to the curb. I was trimming Diane's rose bushes when I saw 2 movers start unloading boxes and furniture. Robert and Linda came out of the house looking triumphant. "Theodore," Robert shouted, "give us a hand, will you? Our things have arrived." I froze. Their things, I hadn't agreed to this. But before I could protest, they were directing the movers inside. And then I saw it. They were carrying out Diane's favorite armchair, the one with the floral print where she used to sit and read every afternoon. My heart seized. "Stop. What are you doing with that chair?" I yelled, rushing inside. Linda turned to me, her face a mask of annoyance. "Oh, this old thing, it's so dated. It doesn't fit the modern aesthetic we're going for. We've already ordered a new white leather sofa. This can go out on the porch, I suppose." "No," I said, my voice low and hard. "That chair stays right where it is." Brianna rushed in, cutting off the confrontation. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen as if I were a misbehaving child. "Dad!" she hissed, her voice a desperate whisper. What is wrong with you? It's just a chair. They just want to make the place feel a little more like home. Can't you just let them? This is our home, mine, yours, and your mother's. My voice cracked with a pain I couldn't hide. I know, she said, her eyes darting away from mine. But they're my family too now. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. And just like that, I lost. I watched as my wife's chair was shoved into a corner soon to be buried under boxes that didn't belong. With every piece of their furniture that came in a piece of my life with Diane was being erased. My fortress was being overrun. That evening, Kyle came home wearing a strained expression he was trying to pass off as calm. As a retired structural engineer, I knew a compromised foundation when I saw one. He gathered everyone in the living room in the empty space where Diane's chair used to be. I have an announcement, he said, clearing his throat. The firm is going through a major restructuring. I've decided to leave my position to pursue a better opportunity. It was a lie. I could see the panic behind his eyes. He'd been fired. His income was gone. And that meant they weren't leaving. Linda immediately started a dramatic display of tears, talking about how her brilliant son was underappreciated. Robert clapped Kyle on the back, proclaiming this was a chance for him to rest and plan his next big move. The whole performance was disgusting. The atmosphere in the house grew suffocating. They were no longer guests. They were parasites, and they began treating me as their full-time caretaker. Linda left me lists of chores on the refrigerator. Robert ordered me to fetch his coffee. They spoke around me and through me as if I were part of the furniture they hadn't yet replaced. The final straw came a week later. It was a Tuesday evening. Brianna and Kyle called me into the living room. Kyle's entire family was there, arranged on their stark white leather sofa like a royal court about to pass sentence. A cold dread crept up my spine. Brianna spoke first, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the floor. Dad, there are going to be some changes. Kyle and I have been talking with his parents. The house is just... it's so big for one person. I said nothing. I waited. Kyle picked up the thread, his voice smooth as oil. That's right, sir. My sister Jennifer and her family are having a tough time financially. We thought it would be wonderful if the whole family could be together, to support each other. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what was coming. Brianna took a deep breath, and after a sharp, encouraging look from her mother-in-law, she delivered the final blow, the words that shattered everything. Kyle's family is moving in. Jennifer's family, too. There won't be enough room. Dad, you're going to have to move out. The room tilted. I looked at the daughter I had raised, the child I had promised my dying wife I would protect. I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. My voice was a dry rasp when I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Brianna looked around desperately for help, but she found only hard, expectant stares. Finally, under the weight of their collective will, she uttered the cruelest words a father could ever hear. I don't know. Go to the dump. You're a survivor. You'll figure it out. Go to the dump. The rage I had suppressed for weeks surged within me like a volcano, but it didn't erupt. There was no yelling, no cursing, no breaking things. Instead, a terrifying calm washed over me. The molten lava of my anger cooled, hardening into granite. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes, and I saw her finally for who she was, a stranger. I nodded slowly. All right. I turned and walked up the stairs to my bedroom without a single backward glance. I could hear their collective sigh of relief. They thought they had won. I opened my closet and took out a small canvas duffel bag. I didn't pack much. A few changes of clothes, the book Diane had been reading before she passed, and a faded photograph of the two of us smiling on our wedding day. I left everything else behind. I left 40 years of my life inside those walls. As I walked back down the stairs, no one moved. They just watched me pass as if I were a ghost already fading from view. I put my hand on the front doorknob and paused. Then I walked out into the cool night air. And for the first time in a long, long time, a smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of defeat. It was the smile of an old engineer who was about to teach a group of arrogant fools a lesson about the structural integrity of the world they had just stolen. The real work was about to begin. I didn't drive to a shelter or a cheap motel reeking of despair. I drove across town to a clean, respectable extended stay hotel I had booked a month ago under my own name. The room was simple, almost sterile. A queen-sized bed with a stiff floral comforter, a small kitchenette, and a modest desk. It was anonymous. It was perfect. I placed my small duffel bag on the bed and didn't bother to unpack the few clothes inside. Instead, I placed my old leather briefcase on the desk. The leather was worn smooth over the decades, scarred with the marks of countless construction sites and planning meetings. To my daughter and her new family, I was just a retired old man, a relic. They had forgotten that I spent 45 years as a structural engineer. My entire life was about understanding foundations, seeing stress points, and knowing that the most impressive structures can crumble if the planning is flawed. I clicked open the two brass latches. The sound echoed in the quiet room. There was no storm of loose papers inside. Everything was organized methodical, just as I had left it. I pulled out the first folder, its tab neatly labeled Homestead. Inside, under a plastic protector, was the original deed to my house. My house. My name was there. Theodore Jackson, right next to the name of my late wife, Diane. I ran a thumb over her signature, a beautiful, confident script that was as familiar to me as my own reflection. They thought they had taken my home, but they didn't understand. A home is more than just walls and a roof, it's a legacy, and a legacy is protected by more than just locks on the doors. I set the deed aside and pulled out the next folder labeled Assets. It contained bank statements, investment portfolios, documents that represented a lifetime of careful saving and smart decisions. I wasn't rich in the way Kyle's family pretended to be, but I was secure, self-sufficient, something they clearly were not. They saw me as a resource to be drained a bank account with a heartbeat. They were about to learn that this bank was closing its doors for good. Finally, I lifted out the heaviest document. It was bound in a dark blue cover nearly an inch thick. The gold lettering on the front was simple, the Diane Jackson Trust. This was the storm. This was the weapon. Diane had insisted we set it up years ago after seeing a close friend of hers lose everything to a greedy son-in-law. I had thought she was being overly cautious, but I trusted her wisdom. She always saw the world with more clarity than I did. She saw the hidden cracks in people. I opened the heavy cover. The pages were filled with dense legal language, but I knew them by heart. I had studied them every night for the past month. My finger traced down to a specific section I had highlighted in yellow marker. Section C, paragraph 4. The Stewardship Clause. A work of quiet genius. A final gift from my wife. A lifeboat she had built for me long before the storm ever hit. They saw an old man walking out of a house. They had no idea they had just walked into a trap that was set for them 5 years ago. I laid the trust agreement open on the desk, turning this sterile hotel room into my new command center. The anger and the hurt were gone, replaced by a cold, clear focus. The focus of an engineer about to demolish a compromised structure to its very foundation. After organizing the documents on the desk, I picked up my cell phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. The phone rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Theo, it's late. Is everything all right?" It was Deacon Harrison. We had known each other for 50 years since we were young men working our first construction jobs together. He was the brother I never had. I took a steadying breath and kept my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil that had raged inside me just hours before. "Harrison," I said. "They kicked me out." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end, followed by an explosion. "They did what, that no-good freeloader Kyle and his snake of a mother Theo? Where are you? I swear I'm going to drive over there and—" "No." I cut him off, my voice firm. "Don't. That's what they'd expect. Anger is a fog, Harrison. And right now I need to see everything with perfect clarity. Besides," I added, a hint of a smile returning to my lips, "Diane prepared for this." "Diane, what are you talking about, Theo? How could she have—" "You know how she was," I said, looking at her signature on the deed. "She saw things other people missed. She always said Kyle's smile never quite reached his eyes. She saw the greed in him that I, in my foolish hope for my daughter's happiness, refused to see. Years ago, she was the one who dragged me to a lawyer's office. She was the one who insisted we structure everything this way." I paused, remembering her exact words as we sat in that stuffy office. She had put her hand on mine and looked me straight in the eye. "Love needs to be protected by logic, Theo," she had said. "Our family, our home, everything we've built, our legacy has to have a firewall." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "The trust," he finally said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "That complex trust she set up. I never understood why it had to be so complicated." "I do now," I replied, "and I'm going to need your help. You're on the board, Harrison. You and I were the first line of defense, just like she planned." There was no hesitation in his voice. "Whatever you need, Theo, you just say the word." The law offices of Reed & Associates were not located in a soulless downtown skyscraper. They occupied a restored brownstone in one of the city's most historic districts. The interior was a testament to quiet old money power. Dark mahogany walls, shelves lined with leather-bound legal volumes, and the faint, pleasant scent of paper and polish. There was no bustling reception area, just a single, impeccably dressed assistant who greeted me by name and led me directly to Ms. Reed's office. Evelyn Reed was not what most people pictured when they thought of an estate lawyer. She was a black woman in her late 40s, sharp and elegant in a tailored navy blue suit. She stood as I entered her handshake firm, and her eyes direct. They were intelligent eyes that seemed to assess, understand, and strategize all in a single glance. Her office was like the rest of the building, a place of order and strength. Behind her large desk was a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto a tranquil garden. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Please have a seat. Can I get you some coffee, water?" "Water would be fine, thank you, Evelyn," I replied, taking the seat opposite her. We had met a few times over the years, mostly during the initial setup of the trust and its periodic reviews. I always felt a sense of reassurance in her presence. She was the kind of person who didn't waste time on pleasantries. She dealt in facts and actions. She returned with a glass of water for me and sat down, folding her hands on the pristine surface of her desk. She didn't ask, "What's wrong?" or "What happened?" She simply waited, giving me the space to speak. "They threw me out," I said, my voice steady. I laid out the events of the past few weeks, not with emotion, but with the detached precision of an engineer reporting a structural failure. I described the slow invasion, my daughter's changing loyalties, the fabricated story of Kyle's job loss, and the final brutal demand that I leave my own home. Throughout my account, Evelyn Reed did not interrupt. She just listened, her expression unchanging, her gaze unwavering. She was like a doctor listening to a list of symptoms, her mind already working on a diagnosis and a cure. When I finished with Brianna's final words to me, "Go to the dump," a flicker of something cold and hard passed through her eyes. It was the only sign of emotion she showed. She leaned back in her chair, the leather groaning softly. "Diane saw this coming," she said. "It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. She saw the potential for it," I corrected gently. "She hoped she was wrong, but she never let hope cloud her judgment." "No, she did not," Evelyn agreed. A small, sad smile touched her lips. She was the most clear-eyed client I have ever had. When we were designing the trust, I offered her a dozen standard templates for asset protection. She rejected all of them. She said, "I'm not protecting money, Ms. Reed. I'm protecting a life. My husband's life. His dignity." She was very specific about the language. She knew that the greatest threat wouldn't come from a stranger, but from within. Evelyn turned to her computer, her fingers moving quickly and quietly across the keyboard. She pulled up a document on her large monitor and swiveled it to face me. It was the Diane Jackson Trust Agreement. "Your wife was a genius, Mr. Jackson," she said, her professional admiration clear in her voice. "Your daughter and her husband. They are amateurs playing a game where your wife already wrote all the rules. They are living in a house they don't own, spending money from accounts they don't control, and assuming power they simply do not have. Their arrogance is blinding them to the legal reality of their situation." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "So the plan we discussed, it's solid. It's ironclad," she stated with absolute confidence. "Diane made sure of it. We are not on the defensive here, Theodore. We are on the offensive. They have made the first move, and in doing so, they have walked directly into the legal framework your wife designed specifically to counter this exact type of aggression." She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the garden. "The world is full of people like your son-in-law, people who see kindness as weakness and generosity as an opportunity for exploitation. Diane knew that. She built this trust not as a passive shield, but as an active, responsive weapon. It's designed to give them just enough rope, and you know the rest of that saying. She turned back to me, her expression all business now. I have already reviewed the preliminary reports you sent over. The unauthorized furniture purchases, the utility bills, the increased spending on Brianna's credit card before you wisely shut it down. We have a clear pattern of behavior. They are not acting like guests. They are acting like conquerors. And that, she said, walking back to her desk, is a direct violation of the trust's foundational principles. They just don't know it yet. Her confidence was infectious. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the solid ground of a well-laid plan beneath my feet. I wasn't just a victim reacting to their cruelty. I was the executor of a brilliant strategy. "What's the first step?" I asked. Evelyn sat down and slid a pen and a fresh legal pad in front of her. "The first step is a simple one. We operate in the quiet. They are expecting you to be broken, perhaps to beg for re-entry. We will give them silence. And in that silence, we will begin to methodically dismantle the illusion of control they've built for themselves. We will start small. We will cut off the non-essential services. The premium cable, the pool maintenance, the gardening service. Small inconveniences that will plant the first seeds of doubt. They will be annoyed, but they will dismiss it as a glitch or an oversight." She looked at me, a sharp intelligence in her eyes. "Then when they are distracted by these minor annoyances, we will send them the first official correspondence. Not from you, from this office. And that Mr. Jackson is when their world will begin to tilt on its axis. They think they're living in your house. They're about to find out they are merely tenants in a property owned by the Diane Jackson Trust. And their lease, so to speak, is about to be terminated." Her professional smile was gone, replaced by the look of a predator who has its prey right where it wants it. They have no idea what's coming. Evelyn gestured for me to turn the monitor back towards her. "Let's get into the specifics, Theodore," she said, her tone shifting from that of a confidant to that of a legal strategist. "It's important you understand not just what we are doing, but why it will work. Your daughter and her husband are operating under a dangerous assumption that because Brianna is your only child, the house and all associated assets are her birthright. They believe her inheritance is automatic, a matter of when, not if. This is the cornerstone of their arrogance, and it is a fatal flaw in their thinking." She clicked the mouse a few times, bringing up a specific page of the trust agreement. The text was dense, but she highlighted a sentence with her cursor. "Most simple wills and trusts are just that simple. They state that upon the owner's death, the property passes to the named heir. If Diane had set up a structure like that, we would be in a much weaker position. We'd be fighting over occupancy rights, and it would be a messy emotional battle. But Diane was smarter than that. She didn't create a simple will. She created the Diane Jackson Trust, an irrevocable living trust. And the distinction is critical. The moment you and she signed these papers 5 years ago," Evelyn continued, tapping the screen for emphasis, "you legally transferred ownership of the house, the investment accounts, and other key assets from Theodore and Diane Jackson, the individuals, to the Diane Jackson Trust, the legal entity. You no longer owned the house in the traditional sense. The trust owned it. You and Diane were appointed as the primary trustees and beneficiaries, meaning you had full control and could live in and enjoy the assets for the rest of your lives. But the ownership, that had already changed hands." I nodded, remembering the long afternoon we spent signing that mountain of paperwork. At the time, it felt like a formality. Now I saw it for what it was, the construction of a fortress. "This is the first firewall," Evelyn said. "Brianna and Kyle cannot claim ownership of something that doesn't belong to you personally. They cannot force you to sell it, and they cannot inherit it directly from you. They can only inherit from the trust, and they must abide by the rules the trust sets out. And those rules," she said, a sharp predatory gleam in her eyes, "are where your wife's genius truly shines. Which brings us to the weapon in our arsenal, Section C, Paragraph 4, the stewardship clause." She scrolled down the page. "Diane was very clear in her instructions to me. She said, 'I'm not leaving my daughter a prize, I'm leaving her a responsibility.' The stewardship clause is the legal embodiment of that philosophy. Let me translate the legalese for you. It states that Brianna is designated as the primary successor beneficiary. The key word there is successor. She only gains this status upon the passing of both original trustees, that's you and Diane. But her right to inherit is not absolute. It is conditional." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. "The The clause explicitly requires that for her to be considered a beneficiary in good standing, she must demonstrate responsible stewardship of the family's legacy. And Diane, bless her heart, defined what that meant. The clause lists several definitions of stewardship, but the most important one is this: providing or ensuring the physical, emotional, and financial well-being of any surviving original trustee. That's you, Theodore. The trust legally obligates her to ensure your well-being. It's not a suggestion. It's a contractual requirement for her inheritance. By throwing you out of the house, Evelyn continued, her voice cold as steel, by telling you to go live at the dump, she has not just been cruel, she has been legally negligent. She has, in the clearest possible terms, violated the stewardship clause. She has failed the primary test her mother set for her. The sheer brilliance of it was staggering. It wasn't about emotion. It was about breach of contract. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Now we activate the consequences that Diane built into the clause, Evelyn explained. The clause grants the trust's governing board the authority to act if the primary successor beneficiary is found to be in violation. That board consists of 3 people. The first is you as the surviving original trustee and executor. The second is an independent legal professional, which is me. And the third is a trusted personal confidant designated by Diane herself in a sealed addendum. She paused for dramatic effect. That person is Deacon Harrison. My jaw nearly dropped. Harrison, of course. Diane had always said he was the most honorable man she knew besides me. The 3 of us form the board, Evelyn went on, and the clause gives the board a range of options. We can issue a formal warning. We can temporarily suspend beneficiary status, or in cases of what Diane termed gross negligence or malicious action, and throwing your own father out certainly qualifies. The board has the unanimous power to enact the ultimate provision. She took a deep breath. We can vote to permanently revoke Brianna's status as the primary successor beneficiary. In essence, we can disinherit her from the trust completely. And if we do that, the trust's cascade protocol is activated. The assets would then pass to the secondary beneficiary named by Diane. My mind raced. A cousin. A close friend who had Diane chosen. Evelyn saw the question in my eyes and gave me a grim smile. That's the final, beautiful, and most devastating part of her plan, Theodore. She didn't name another relative. She knew that could just lead to more family drama. Instead, she named a charity. I was stunned into silence. Not just any charity, Evelyn clarified, her voice filled with admiration for her former client. She named the National Foundation for Abused Elders, a nonprofit that provides legal aid and housing for senior citizens who are victims of financial and emotional abuse by their own families. If Brianna proves unworthy of her inheritance by abusing you, then the entire value of the estate, the house, the investments, everything will be liquidated and the proceeds donated to help hundreds of other parents who are in your exact situation. Her cruelty will directly fund the salvation of others. It's poetic, it's brilliant, and it is perfectly legally unstoppable. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the depth of my wife's foresight. She had not only protected me, she had turned a potential act of profound betrayal into an act of profound justice. So, I said finally, my voice filled with awe, Brianna and Kyle are living in a house that is essentially a ticking time bomb. They think they've captured a castle, but they're really just squatting in the lobby of a charity. Precisely, Evelyn confirmed, her professional demeanor returning. They have no idea what legal ground they are standing on, or rather what legal ground is about to open up right underneath them. Our job now is to simply follow the protocol Diane laid out. We will document their actions, we will issue the warnings, and we will give them every opportunity to reverse course. But knowing the kind of people they have shown themselves to be, they won't. Their greed and arrogance will be the instruments of their own destruction. All we have to do is let the brilliant legal machine that your wife built do its work. Back in my quiet hotel room, I didn't need a crystal ball to know what was happening in my house. I could picture it perfectly. Deacon Harrison, who lived just 2 streets over, would give me brief, grim updates on his drive home from church. He told me about the loud music, the cars I didn't recognize lining the curb. My house, once a sanctuary of peace and quiet memories, had been turned into a frat house for the entitled. I imagined Linda Kyle's mother holding court in my living room, lounging on her sterile white leather sofa like a queen on a borrowed throne. She'd have a glass of wine in her hand, probably complaining about the quality of the local grocery store. I simply cannot find decent prosciutto anywhere in this town. I could hear her saying, her voice thin and sharp. And the decor in this place before we arrive, so dreadfully outdated. All those dark woods and floral patterns. It's a miracle we've been able to make it look halfway respectable. Robert, her husband, would be out back on the patio, probably smoking one of the expensive cigars he couldn't afford. He'd be on his phone talking loudly about phantom business deals, making sure anyone within earshot knew he was an important man. Yes, the market is volatile, he'd boom, but a man with foresight can always find an opportunity. We're looking at a major acquisition in the spring. It was all a performance, a desperate attempt to project a wealth they had never earned. And Kyle would be the ringmaster of this sad circus. He'd be mixing cocktails, his laughter a little too loud, his movements a little too frantic. He was a man running from the truth of his own failure, and he was using my home and my money as his hiding place. Deacon told me he'd overheard Kyle talking to one of his new friends at a recent backyard party. "Has the old man called yet?" the friend asked. I can just hear Kyle's smug reply. "Nah, not a word. He's probably holed up in some charity shelter licking his wounds. He's a proud man. He'll come crawling back when his pride runs out or his money does. Whichever comes first, we'll let him have the little guest room in the basement then." They all laughed. The sound of their laughter, even in my imagination, felt like grinding glass. They saw my departure not as an act of dignity, but as a surrender. They believed they had won. They were conquerors, celebrating their victory amidst the spoils of a war I had refused to fight on their terms. And my daughter Brianna, I pictured her trying desperately to keep up smiling when she was supposed to smile, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. She would be wearing new clothes, things I knew she couldn't afford, trying to fit into this new, shiny world her husband had promised her. But I knew my daughter. I could imagine the shadow behind her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she refilled her wine glass. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the noise and the emptiness that came with it. She had traded her father's love for the approval of these hollow people. Their conversations, as reported by Deacon, were a mix of arrogance and petty complaints. They talked about remodeling the kitchen, about putting in a new hot tub. They spent money they didn't have, living on the fumes of my life's work, completely oblivious to the fact that the engine was about to run dry. They operated under the grand delusion that my resources were infinite and my spirit was broken. But even in their victory party, the first cracks were beginning to show. "Did the pool guy ever show up?" I imagined Linda asking, a frown creasing her brow. "The water is starting to look a little cloudy." Kyle would wave a dismissive hand. "I'll call them tomorrow. They probably just messed up the schedule." Then Robert would chime in from the doorway. "And the internet is slow as molasses. I was trying to stream the game and it kept buffering. For what Theodore was paying, you'd expect fiber optic." "We'll get it sorted." Kyle would promise, his voice full of false confidence. "Just a few little bugs to work out." They saw them as bugs. Tiny, insignificant annoyances in their new paradise. They had no idea they were tripwires. They were the first soft clicks of a complex machine beginning to operate, a machine designed by a brilliant woman 5 years ago, now being run by a patient-grieving engineer. They were celebrating in a house that was no longer a home. It was an elaborate trap, and its doors had just quietly swung shut behind them. The first move in Evelyn Reed's strategy was not a cannonball, but a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the current. From my hotel room, I authorized her to begin. She handled it with the surgical precision of a master strategist. The targets were not the core necessities, but the luxuries, the symbols of the easy, entitled life they had stolen. The first casualty was the pool. Kyle and his family loved that pool. They spent hours lounging by it, drinking cocktails, acting as if they were at a permanent resort. The weekly pool service was scheduled for every Tuesday. I could just picture Kyle wearing expensive sunglasses and swim trunks, waiting for the blue service truck that never arrived. By Thursday, a thin green film would have started to form on the surface. By the weekend, the crystal clear water would be a cloudy, uninviting green. I imagined him finally calling the pool company, his voice tight with annoyance. "Yes, this is Kyle from the Jackson residence on Elm Street. Your guy didn't show up this week." And the response from the other end would have been polite, professional, and devastatingly simple. "I'm sorry, sir. Our records show that the service contract for that address was canceled last week. We received the notification from the account holder." Kyle would have been furious, but not alarmed. In his mind, I was the account holder. He would assume this was a petty act of revenge, an old man forgetting to pay a bill to spite them. He'd probably tell Linda, "Don't worry, I'll handle it. The old man is trying to be difficult. It's just pathetic." He would see it as a nuisance, not a warning. The second strike came that Friday night. I knew they planned to watch some big premiere on a premium movie channel. I could see them all gathered on their white leather sofa, a bowl of popcorn in Robert's lap, ready for their evening's entertainment. But when Kyle turned on the massive flat-screen TV, the channel would have been gone. He'd flipped through the guide, his annoyance growing. All the premium channels, the movie networks, the sports packages, all of them gone. Replaced by a block of text, "This channel is not included in your subscription package." Even worse, the high-speed internet that fueled their dozens of devices would have been throttled down to a crawl. Streaming would be impossible. The game Robert wanted to watch would buffer endlessly. This was no longer a simple nuisance. This was an attack on their way of life. This time Kyle would have stormed into the other room to make the call himself, slamming the door behind him. I can hear the frustration in his voice as he finally got through to a customer service representative. "Yes, my name is Kyle Grant at 142 Elm Street. My premium channels are gone and my internet is useless. I want to know what's going on." The polite voice on the other end would ask for a moment to check the account. "Okay, Mr. Grant, I have the account pulled up here. I see the service address, but the account holder is not under your name." "It's under Theodore Jackson," Kyle would snap, impatient. "Actually, sir," the representative would reply, "the account of record is listed under the name of the Diane Jackson Trust." There would be a brief, confused silence. "The what? No, that's a mistake. It's my father-in-law's house." "I can only tell you what the record says, sir. The account holder is the trust. And I can confirm that we received a formal authorized request from the trust's legal representative to downgrade the service to the Basic Essentials package. That change was processed yesterday." "Legal representative? What are you talking about? Just switch it back." "I'm sorry, sir, but only an authorized party on the account can make changes. The Diane Jackson Trust is the only authorized party." Kyle would have slammed the phone down his face, a mixture of anger and confusion. He would walk back into the living room trying to project confidence. "It's the old man," he'd announce. "He's playing some stupid legal games with the bills, probably trying to hide money in some trust for tax purposes, and now he's trying to annoy us by cutting things off. Don't worry, it's a pathetic little tantrum. I'll sort it out." But as he said it, a seed of doubt would have been planted. A trust legal representatives. It was a language he didn't understand, a complication he hadn't anticipated. But his arrogance, his fatal flaw, would not allow him to see the truth. He saw a bitter old man's prank, not the opening salvo of a meticulously planned legal war. The next step in my quiet war was to cut off the money supply. For years, my daughter Brianna had been an authorized user on my primary credit card. It was an account with a high limit and a long history of perfect payments, a safety net I had given her for emergencies. But under the influence of Kyle and his family, that safety net had become her personal slush fund for luxuries and vanity. From my hotel room, I made a simple phone call. I spoke to a very helpful representative, went through 2 security questions, and in less than 5 minutes, I had her card deactivated. I knew my daughter's habits. I knew it wouldn't take long for the consequences of that call to find her. I could picture the scene perfectly. It would have been a Saturday afternoon. Brianna and her mother-in-law, Linda, were most likely at one of the high-end boutiques downtown, the kind of place with plush carpets, intimidatingly stylish sales assistants, and price tags that looked like phone numbers. This was their bonding ritual, an exercise in spending my money to solidify Brianna's place in their shallow world. I imagined Brianna gliding through the store, her arms laden with expensive fabrics. A silk blouse here, a cashmere sweater there, and the prize of the day, a ridiculously overpriced designer handbag that Linda had pointed out. "Oh, Brianna, you simply must have it," Linda would have cooed, her eyes gleaming. "It will show everyone that you've finally arrived." Brianna, flush with the power of her new position as Lady of the Manor, would have felt invincible. I can see her at the polished marble checkout counter piling her treasures before the cashier. The bill would have been astronomical, easily thousands of dollars. She would have smiled smugly at Linda, a little inside joke passing between them about how easy it all was. "Don't worry, I've got this," she would say, pulling the familiar credit card from her wallet. The irony would have been lost on her that she was using a symbol of my paternal love to fuel the very lifestyle that had pushed me out. She would hand the card to the cashier with a confident flourish. The cashier, a young woman with a practiced, polite smile, would swipe it through the machine. There would be a small beep, a pause. The cashier's smile would falter slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, let me just try that again." She would swipe it a second time. The same result. The little screen would flash a single brutal word, "declined." Brianna's confident expression would crumble. "That's impossible," she would snap, her voice suddenly sharp. "There's no limit on that card. Run it again." The cashier, now looking a little nervous, would try a third time. "I'm so sorry," she would say, her voice softer, trying to avoid a scene. "It's definitely not going through. It says the card has been canceled." The word would hang in the air like a foul odor. Canceled. A few other shoppers would start to glance over, sensing drama. Linda's adoring expression would curdle into one of embarrassment, then annoyance. This was not the glamorous outing she had planned. This was a public humiliation. Fuming, her face flushed a deep red, Brianna would snatch the card back. "This is ridiculous," she'd mutter, stepping away from the counter and pulling out her phone. I can hear the fury in her voice as she navigated the automated menu and finally got a human being on the line at the bank. "I am in the middle of a transaction and my card was declined," she would have seethed into the phone. "I want to know why. My name is Brianna Grant." The calm, dispassionate voice of the bank representative would be the voice of her new reality. "Yes, Ms. Grant. I can see your name here as an authorized user on the account. One moment, please." A few clicks. "Okay, ma'am, it looks like your card was declined because your authorization was revoked this morning by the primary account holder, Mr. Theodore Jackson." "He can't do that," she would have shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief and rage. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the representative would reply, completely unmoved. "The primary card holder has sole authority to add or remove authorized users at any time." She would hang up the phone, her hand trembling. The truth would hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a mistake. This was an action. Her father, the quiet, defeated old man she had dismissed and discarded, had just cut her off. He was fighting back. She would look over at her mother-in-law, who was now tapping her foot impatiently, her face a mask of cold disapproval. In that moment, Brianna would realize that her value in Linda's eyes was tied directly to that piece of plastic. Without it, she was just an embarrassment. She would have had to walk away from the counter, leaving the handbag, the blouses, and the sweater behind her cheeks, burning with a shame she had never known. For the first time, she would understand that the power she thought she had was never really hers at all. After the small cuts and inconveniences came the first official shot across the bow. From her office, Evelyn Reed drafted the letter. It wasn't a plea or a complaint. It was a formal declaration of legal reality. She sent it via certified mail, a detail I knew would add a layer of unwelcome gravity to their afternoon. A certified letter isn't junk mail. It demands to be acknowledged. It requires a signature. I pictured the mail carrier arriving at the door, the formal-looking envelope in his hand. Brianna would have been the one to answer, a flicker of confusion on her face as she was asked to sign for it. She would have taken the stiff, important-feeling envelope inside a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She would find the others in the living room relaxing amidst the spoils of their conquest. "This just came," she would say, her voice uncertain. "Certified mail." Robert, playing the part of the man of the house, would take it from her with a dismissive grunt. "Probably just some local tax assessment," he'd say, tearing it open with his thumb, his movements full of unearned authority. The whole family would gather around as he unfolded the single heavy sheet of paper. I knew every word of that letter by heart. Evelyn had let me read the final draft. It was a masterpiece of cold corporate lethality. It didn't begin with "Dear Occupants," it began with the address. "Regarding unauthorized tenancy at 142 Elm Street. This letter serves as formal notice from the law offices of Reed & Associates. We act as legal counsel for the sole and legal owner of the aforementioned property, the Diane Jackson Trust." I can see the confusion on their faces as Robert read those words aloud. The Diane Jackson Trust. Kyle's brow would furrow. He had heard that name on the phone with the cable company. He had dismissed it then. Now here it was again on a legal document. Robert would continue reading, his voice losing some of its bluster. "It has come to the attention of the Trust's governing board that the property is currently being occupied by several unlicensed individuals. This unauthorized tenancy constitutes a violation of the Trust's governance and a significant liability. Under the authority granted to us by the trust, we hereby inform you that you have 30 calendar days from the date of this notice to take one of the following two actions. 1. Present a formal executed lease agreement to the board for review and consideration. Or 2. Vacate the premises entirely, leaving the property in the condition in which you found it. The final paragraph was the hammer blow. Failure to comply with this notice by the specified deadline will result in the immediate commencement of formal eviction proceedings. The trust will also pursue any and all available legal remedies to recover financial compensation for damages, unpaid utilities, and costs associated with your unauthorized use of the property. Govern yourselves accordingly. It was signed simply, Evelyn Reed, Counsel for the Diane Jackson Trust. For a moment there would be a stunned silence. The legal language was so cold, so absolute. But then their arrogance, their one true guiding principle, would reassert itself. Robert would be the first to break the silence with a short, barking laugh. "What a joke!" he'd exclaim, crumpling the letter slightly in his fist. Kyle would snatch it from him, his eyes scanning the page, a vein pulsing in his temple. "It's the old man," he'd say, his voice full of derision. "This is his next pathetic move. He scraped together enough money to hire some cheap lawyer to send a scary-looking letter. He's trying to intimidate us." "But a trust?" Brianna would ask, the unease now a genuine flicker of fear in her eyes. "What does that mean?" Linda would wave a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. "It means nothing, dear. It's just a fancy way rich people avoid taxes. Your father is just bitter. The house belongs to his daughter. It's that simple. This piece of paper is meaningless. He has no power." They would all look at each other, their confidence rebuilt on a foundation of shared ignorance. They saw a desperate gambit from a powerless old man. They did not see the first move of a legally binding process they had just been formally warned about. I can see them tossing the letter onto the coffee table, another piece of trash in my beautiful home, and going back to their lazy afternoon, laughing about how desperate I must be. And in my quiet hotel room, I would have allowed myself a small, grim smile. The warning had been issued. The warning had been ignored. The trap was now legally set. Evelyn Reed had warned me that their reaction to the letter would be the most critical phase of the plan. Arrogant people do not respond to legal threats with caution. Theodore, she had told me, they respond with indignation. They will see it as an insult, not a warning, and their pride will force them to ignore it. Let them. Their dismissal is a necessary step in the legal process. She was, as always, absolutely right. I can picture the scene in my living room as if I were a fly on the wall. The letter would be lying on the coffee table, a stark white rectangle of truth in a room full of self-deception. A heavy silence would have followed Robert's reading, the weight of the legal jargon pressing down on them. But it wouldn't last. Robert would be the one to break it with a loud, incredulous laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Well, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever read," he would bellow, slapping his knee. "A trust eviction proceedings. Does the old fool really think he can scare us out of our own family's home with a piece of paper?" He would look around the room, seeking agreement, his blustering personality unable to comprehend a threat that wasn't loud and physical. Kyle, ever the loyal son, would quickly jump in, playing the role of the knowledgeable expert. He'd pick up the letter, scanning it with a dismissive smirk. "Dad's right. It's a classic scare tactic. This is what you do when you have no real power. You hire some cut-rate lawyer to draft a letter full of big words. See this part? The Diane Jackson Trust. It's a simple tax shelter, that's all. A way for him to hide assets. It has no bearing on actual ownership, especially not when the sole heir is living in the house. He's just trying to get a reaction. The best thing we can do is ignore it completely. Show him his little games don't work on us." Linda would chime in her concerns, as always centered on appearances. "Well, whatever it is, it's terribly embarrassing," she would say with a sniff, looking at the letter as if it were a cockroach. "Imagine if the mailman told people we were receiving eviction notices. We need to put a stop to this nonsense. It's just not a good look." Only Brianna would have felt the cold chill of reality. "But are you sure, Kyle?" I can hear her voice small and uncertain. "It sounds so official. And I think I remember Mom talking about setting up a trust a long time ago. She said it was for protection. That would have been her last chance, the final whisper of her conscience." But the others would have snuffed it out instantly. Kyle would have turned to her, his expression shifting from arrogance to annoyance. "Brianna, don't be so naive. Whose side are you on? Are you going to believe some legal mumbo-jumbo from your bitter old father who you kicked out, or are you going to trust your husband and your family? We are your family now. He's trying to manipulate you to make you feel guilty. Don't fall for it. You need to be strong. He would put his arm around her, pulling her into their circle of delusion. She would look at her husband, then at his parents, and then back at the letter. And she would make her final choice. She would nod, burying that flicker of doubt deep down inside. "You're right," she would say, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." Robert, seeing his victory, would stand up and snatch the letter from the table. "Exactly. This is what we do with pathetic little threats," he would declare. And with a grand theatrical gesture, he would tear the heavy paper in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter down into the cold, empty fireplace. They would all watch the torn scraps settle like dead leaves, a triumphant silence filling the room. They believed they had just destroyed the threat. And in my hotel room, had I been able to see it, I would have felt a profound sense of grim satisfaction. They had been served, they had been warned, and they had of their own free will provided us with a documented refusal to comply. They hadn't just torn up a letter, they had torn up their last chance. The 30-day deadline stipulated in Evelyn's letter came and went. As expected, we received no reply, no phone call, no panicked inquiry, just a profound, arrogant silence. That silence was their final, fatal error. It was the legal equivalent of a confession. On the 31st day, Evelyn filed the official petition with the court to activate the final provisions of the trust. The gears of justice began to turn slowly and invisibly. That weekend, they decided to throw a party. Deacon Harrison drove past the house on Saturday evening and called me later, his voice heavy with disgust. It wasn't a small get-together. It was a full-blown catered affair. A valet was parking cars on my lawn. Paper lanterns were strung up in the branches of the old oak tree Diane and I had planted as newlyweds. The sound of loud music and false laughter spilled out into the quiet suburban night. It was a celebration of their victory, a party to consecrate their new kingdom. I could picture the scene in vivid, painful detail. Kyle would be at the center of it all, playing the gracious host. He'd be wearing a ridiculously expensive shirt, a drink in his hand, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. This party was his coronation. He'd be bragging to his friends' men with soft hands and predatory smiles about the new job he had supposedly landed. Yes, a senior VP position at a rival firm. He'd lie smoothly. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It comes with a significant equity stake. It's good to finally be in a position to give my family and Brianna's family the security they deserve. Robert would be holding court by the grill I had built with my own hands, flipping steaks and dispensing unsolicited financial advice. He'd be surrounded by a small crowd, captivated by his performance of a self-made titan of industry. "The key is aggression," he'd say, gesturing with a pair of tongs. "You can't be timid. When you see an opportunity, you have to seize it with both hands. Take this house, for instance. A beautiful property, solid bones. It just needed a firm hand to take charge and maximize its potential." Linda, meanwhile, would be leading tours, showing off the house as if she were its designer and lifelong owner. Her voice would carry across the lawn, dripping with false modesty. "Oh, the decor was just dreadful when we arrived," she'd tell a group of women with identical bleached hair and surgically tightened faces. "So dark and cluttered. We had to open it up, let some light in, give it a modern, clean feel. It has such wonderful potential, don't you think?" She would point out the new white sofa, the minimalist art she had hung on my walls, never once mentioning who had paid for the house, the walls, or the very ground they were standing on. And Brianna. I imagined my daughter moving through the crowd, her smile bright but brittle. She would be clinging to Kyle's arm, her laughter a little too high, a little too sharp. She'd be playing the part of the perfect supportive wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law. She would be nodding along as Linda's friends complimented her on how lucky she was. She would have pushed the memory of my face, of her own cruel words, into the deepest, darkest corner of her mind. Tonight she was not the girl who had sent her father to a dumpster. She was the mistress of a grand estate, and she would not let anything, not even her own conscience, ruin the illusion. At some point in the evening, I'm sure someone would have brought me up. Perhaps one of Kyle's friends, emboldened by alcohol. "So what ever happened with Brianna's old man?" he might ask. "Did he ever get over you guys taking over the place?" Kyle would let out a condescending chuckle. "Oh, him. He sent some ridiculous letter from a lawyer a few weeks back. All this nonsense about a trust and eviction. Can you believe the nerve? The whole group would laugh. So what did you do? The friend would press. We did what you do with junk mail, Robert would interject, joining the circle. We threw it in the trash where it belongs. The man is irrelevant. He had his time and now it's our time. That's the natural order of things. They would all nod in agreement, their faces smug in the warm glow of the party lights. Their confidence was absolute. They had received a legal warning and had answered it with a party. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my patience for defeat. They were dancing and drinking and celebrating on the deck of a ship, utterly oblivious to the fact that 500 miles away in a quiet office, a woman named Evelyn Reed was reviewing the final court order that would sink them. This party was their peak, the highest, most glorious point of their self-delusion. It was the last happy evening they would ever spend in my house. And as I sat in my quiet hotel room picturing the scene, I felt no anger, only a profound and final sense of pity. They weren't just celebrating a victory. They were celebrating their own ruin. I imagine the party was at its peak around 9 o'clock. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing freely, and the sound of their self-congratulatory laughter echoed through my backyard. Kyle was likely in the middle of telling some exaggerated story, his audience of sycophants hanging on his every word. He would have felt like the king of the world in that moment, untouchable in the fortress he believed he had conquered. That was the moment we had chosen to strike. The arrival would not have been loud. It would have been a quiet disruption far more unsettling than a shouting match. 2 dark, polished sedans would have pulled up to the curb, their presence a stark contrast to the flashy sports cars and luxury SUVs parked haphazardly on my lawn. The valet, a young kid hired for the night, would have approached the first car, but the look from the driver would have stopped him in his tracks. From the first car, Evelyn Reed would have emerged. She wouldn't be dressed for a party. She would be wearing a dark, perfectly tailored pantsuit, her hair pulled back severely, a leather briefcase held firmly in one hand. She was not a guest. She was an executioner. From the second car, 2 other figures would have stepped out. The first was Deacon Harrison. He wouldn't be wearing his usual warm Sunday smile. His face would be a mask of grim determination, his eyes filled with a righteous disappointment that was more damning than any anger. The second figure was a woman named Eleanor Gable, a retired judge and an old friend of Diane's, the third silent member of the trust's board. She carried herself with an unshakable air of authority. Together, the 3 of them looked like a tribunal arriving to pass sentence. They didn't go to the front door. They walked with a calm, deliberate pace up the driveway and around the side of the house, entering the backyard through the garden gate. Their silent, purposeful procession through the party would have been like a cold wind sweeping through the crowd. Conversations would falter. The music, suddenly seeming jarring and inappropriate, would be turned down. People would step aside, their smiles fading, a sense of confusion and unease rippling through the guests. They ignored everyone, their eyes fixed on a single target, Kyle, who stood by the patio, his smile frozen on his face as he watched these 3 uninvited guests approach. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Evelyn Reed did not stop until she was standing directly in front of him. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words cut through the night air, clear and cold as ice. "Kyle Grant," she asked, though it was not a question. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I believe you received our notice. Your 30 days are over." The silence that fell over the backyard was heavier than any I had ever known in that house. The party was over. The guests just moments before so loud and carefree were now a frozen audience to a drama they didn't understand. Kyle stared at Evelyn Reed, his face a mask of disbelief. He was a man whose entire world had just been tilted off its axis, and he was scrambling for footing. He found it, as he always did, in aggression. "I don't know who you think you are," he spat, taking a step forward, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate her. "But you are not welcome here. This is a private party on my property, and I am asking you to leave before I call the police." My property. Those were the 2 words Evelyn had been waiting for. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. I could imagine the ghost of a smile on her face, the smile of a chess master watching her opponent move his king into the path of her queen. "That is precisely the issue we are here to discuss, Mr. Grant," she said, her voice cutting through the tense air. "Your fundamental and frankly disastrous misunderstanding of the term 'your property.' With a slow, deliberate movement, she placed her briefcase on the glass patio table, the click of the latches echoing in the silence. She opened it and removed a single thick document with a blue cover. "This," she announced, holding it up for all to see, "is a certified copy of the deed for the property located at 142 Elm Street, as filed with the county registrar's office 5 years ago. It is a public record. It is the only legal proof of ownership. Perhaps you would like to read the name listed under owner." Kyle stared at the document, speechless. Robert, seeing his son falter, stepped into the breach, his face red with bluster. "This is ridiculous. This is just semantics. Legal nonsense. Everyone knows this house belongs to his daughter, Brianna. It's her inheritance." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Robert, and it was like watching a predator turn its attention from one target to another. Her eyes were chips of ice. "Sir, with all due respect, what everyone knows is legally irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what is written in the law. And the law is not a matter of opinion." She tapped the document with a perfectly manicured finger. "Allow me to save you the trouble of reading it. The owner of this house, this land, and everything on it is not Theodore Jackson. The owner is not Brianna Grant." She paused, letting the words sink in, letting the entire party hang on her next sentence. "The sole and exclusive legal owner of record," she declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority, "is the Diane Jackson Trust, a legally incorporated and irrevocable entity." The word trust silenced them again. It was a concept they didn't understand, a phantom they couldn't fight. Evelyn pressed her advantage. "Which means, Mr. Grant," she said, turning her merciless gaze back to Kyle, "that you are currently trespassing on private property owned by my client, the trust. Your father is trespassing, your mother is trespassing, and your wife," she added, her eyes briefly finding Brianna in the crowd, who looked like she was about to faint, "is not here as an owner with rights, but as a guest whose welcome along with yours has been officially and legally rescinded by the trust's governing board." Trespassing. Rescinded. These were not the words of a bitter old man. These were the words of the law. The aggression drained from Kyle's face, replaced by a pale, sickly confusion. Robert's jaw hung open, his blustering rage deflated into stunned silence. The crowd of guests began to subtly back away, sensing the deep, irreversible humiliation that was unfolding. They were no longer at a party. They were witnesses to an execution. Evelyn Reed let her words hang in the air, letting the full, crushing weight of their meaning settle upon them. The first part of their foundation, their belief that they owned the very ground they stood on, had just been utterly demolished. The stunned silence that followed Evelyn's declaration of ownership was absolute. The party guests were statues. Robert and Kyle looked like fish out of water, their mouths opening and closing, but no sound coming out. They had built their entire plan on one simple, flawed assumption, and that assumption had just been pulverized. It was Brianna, my daughter, who finally found her voice. Panic gave her a strength that arrogance had not. "No, that's crazy," she stammered, stepping forward. Her eyes were wide, darting between Evelyn Deacon and the stunned faces of her in-laws. Even if the house is in a trust, I'm the beneficiary. I'm his only daughter. It's still my house. It's my inheritance." Her desperate cry was the last gasp of her entitlement. I could picture Evelyn Reed turning her full attention to my daughter, her expression unreadable, but her eyes missing nothing. "You are correct on one point, Ms. Grant," Evelyn said, her voice softening just enough to draw everyone in. A surgeon calmly explaining a fatal diagnosis. "You were designated as the primary successor beneficiary in the trust your mother created." A flicker of hope of vindication flashed across Brianna's face, but it was short-lived. "However," Evelyn continued, and that single word seemed to suck all the air out of the backyard, "your mother did not believe in unconditional inheritance. She believed that a legacy was a responsibility, not a prize. Therefore, your status as a beneficiary was made conditional." Kyle, finally recovering his voice, scoffed. "Conditional? What does that even mean? It's her father's house." Evelyn ignored him completely, her eyes locked on Brianna. "It means, Ms. Grant, that your right to inherit anything from this trust was tied to a specific set of responsibilities. It's all outlined in Section C, Paragraph 4. We call it the Stewardship Clause. Your mother was very clear in her instructions when we drafted it. She wanted to ensure the person who inherited this legacy was worthy of it." Evelyn took a small step closer to Brianna. "The clause states that for you to be considered a beneficiary in good standing, you must demonstrate responsible stewardship. And your mother, a very wise woman, defined that term very precisely. The primary definition, the one that overrides all others, is, and I quote, providing for the physical, emotional, and financial well-being of any surviving original trustee. That, Ms. Grant, is your father. The blood drained from my daughter's face. The legal language was gone, replaced by a simple, brutal truth that she could not escape. When you stood in that living room and told your 70-year-old father to go live in a dumpster so you could move your husband's family into his home. Evelyn stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a cold recitation of fact. You did not just commit an act of profound personal cruelty. You committed an act of profound legal negligence. You violated the single most important condition of your inheritance. You failed in the most spectacular way imaginable to be a responsible steward. Brianna began to tremble, her eyes darting to Kyle, then to his parents as if begging them to refute it, to say something. But they were silent. They were just as horrified as she was. They were beginning to understand that the very act of cruelty they had encouraged was the trigger for their own doom. And that violation, Evelyn concluded, her voice like the tolling of a funeral bell, has consequences. The stewardship clause grants the trust's governing board, which consists of myself, Mr. Harrison here, and Mrs. Gable, the unanimous authority to act. She paused, letting the full weight of the situation press down on my daughter. After we were made aware of the situation, the board convened last week to review the facts. And Ms. Grant, we voted. The word voted hung in the air, a simple word with the devastating weight of a guillotine blade. Brianna stared at Evelyn Reed, her mouth slightly open, her mind refusing to process the implication. Voted? She whispered, her voice a dry rasp. What does that mean? Evelyn's professional demeanor was absolute, a mask of impenetrable calm that offered no comfort, no hope. It means, Ms. Grant, that in accordance with the powers granted to us by the trust your mother created, the board has made a final and legally binding decision regarding your status as a beneficiary. She looked from Brianna to Kyle to Robert and Linda, ensuring they all understood the gravity of the moment. Due to your gross negligence in the care of your father, which constitutes a direct and irredeemable violation of the stewardship clause, the board has voted unanimously to permanently revoke your status as the primary successor beneficiary. Effective immediately, you are disinherited. You have no claim to this house, to the investment accounts, or to any other asset held by the Diane Jackson Trust. Your inheritance. Evelyn concluded, her voice as sharp and final as a gavel strike, is gone. It was a mortal blow. Brianna swayed on her feet, a choked sob escaping her lips. All the fight, all the arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw animal panic of someone who has just lost everything. Kyle rushed to her side, grabbing her arm, but his face was as pale as hers. You can't do that, he yelled, his voice cracking. That's her money, her house. We'll sue you. We'll sue all of you. Evelyn Reed didn't even bother to look at him. She was already looking past them toward the garden gate. I think you'll find that course of action to be unproductive, she said calmly. And then they saw him. A man in a sharp gray suit holding a tablet was walking calmly through the stunned party guests. He stopped beside Evelyn. This is Mr. Davies, Evelyn announced to the silent crowd. He is the lead agent from Sterling Realty Group. Mr. Davies gave a polite professional nod. He didn't seem to notice he was in the middle of a social catastrophe. Good evening, he said, his voice crisp. Just here to do a final walkthrough before the new owners arrive. The new owners. The words landed with the force of a physical impact. What new owners? Robert stammered, his face a mask of utter confusion. Evelyn Reed delivered the final crushing blow. As I explained, Ms. Grant's violation activated the trust's cascade protocol. Her inheritance is gone, but the assets don't simply disappear. Your mother, Ms. Grant, was very specific about what would happen next. She looked directly at Brianna, a hint of something that might have been pity in her eyes. The protocol dictated that upon your disinheritance, all major assets of the trust were to be immediately liquidated. The entire net worth of the estate. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. That's correct, he said, looking at his tablet. The house at 142 Elm Street was put on the market as a private sale last Tuesday. We received an all-cash offer significantly above asking price that same day. The sale closed this morning. The property has been sold. Sold. The word echoed in the dead silence. And the money, Kyle whispered, his voice trembling, the last vestiges of his bravado gone. Where is the money? The money. Evelyn Reed said, her voice ringing with the clear, beautiful finality of justice, has already been transferred in accordance with the trust's unalterable instructions to the secondary beneficiary. She paused, letting them all hang on her final words. The full proceeds from the sale of this house, along with the contents of every investment account, have been wired to the National Foundation for Abused Elders. Your inheritance, Ms. Grant, is now a charitable donation. It will be used to provide safe housing and legal aid for hundreds of elderly people who have been abandoned and exploited by their own children. The collapse was total. Robert sank onto the edge of a patio chair, his face gray. Linda let out a low, guttural moan. Kyle just stared, his mind completely broken. And Brianna, my daughter. She finally looked around at the party, at the lanterns, at the stunned faces of the friends who were no longer her friends, at the house that was no longer her house, and she let out a single piercing scream of pure, unadulterated loss. Mr. Davies, looking uncomfortable for the first time, cleared his throat again. "The new owners will be arriving with their moving trucks at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning," he said softly. "They have requested that the property be completely vacant upon their arrival. Any personal items left behind will be disposed of." A few weeks later, I was sitting on the porch of a small, cozy house overlooking the ocean. The air was clean and salty. The only sounds were the cries of gulls and the gentle rhythm of the waves. This house was much smaller than my old one, but it felt more like home than that place had in years. I had bought it with my own personal funds, money I had set aside long ago, completely separate from the trust. It was mine in a way that Grand House had never truly been. Deacon Harrison sat in the chair beside me, a cup of coffee in his hand. We were watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Did you hear what happened to them?" he asked quietly. I nodded. I had heard. They had been forced to move into a cramped, cheap apartment. Kyle's fictional job offer had, of course, vanished. Robert and Linda had gone back to whatever meager existence they'd had before. They were all blaming each other, their alliance of greed crumbling into bitter resentment. "Diane was brilliant, wasn't she?" Deacon said, shaking his head in admiration. "She didn't just want to punish them if they did wrong. She wanted to create something good out of it. She always said that an inheritance shouldn't be a reward for being born." I replied, my voice thick with memory. "She said it should be a tool. She chose that charity specifically. She turned Brianna's selfishness into a legacy of kindness. Our family's wealth is now saving hundreds of fathers and mothers from the same fate I was facing. My daughter's inheritance wasn't destroyed. It was transformed." We sat in a comfortable silence, two old friends watching the day end. For the first time in a long time, I felt a profound sense of peace. My daughter has called dozens of times, crying, begging, apologizing. I haven't answered. Maybe one day I will, but not yet. Healing takes time. I've learned that a man's dignity is not measured by what he gives away, but by what he refuses to let anyone take from him. I didn't lose a house. I just finally saw a family that had been lost to me for a long time. In the end, Diane didn't just leave me a set of legal documents. She left me a blueprint for my own survival. She reminded me that even at 70 years old, it is never too late to stand up, to draw a line in the sand, and to reclaim the peace you have earned. And that is a foundation that no one can ever tear down. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength is not measured by volume or aggression, but by patience, intelligence, and the quiet refusal to be erased. It teaches us that the greatest legacy isn't the wealth we leave behind, but the dignity we maintain and the foresight we use to protect our own peace. Kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and sometimes the most loving act is to build a fortress of logic and law to defend your heart. It proves that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, not with anger, but with a well-executed plan. What would you have done in my situation?